She had a brief reign, but it was a very effective one, at least in terms of publicizing the Prohibition movement.
The short-term goal was, let's just shut the saloons down and see if we can drive the booze makers out of business that way. This culminated in the middle 1890s with the creation of an organization called the Anti-Saloon League.
The Anti-Saloon League was headed by a series of Methodist clergymen, but really controlled by and made effective by a lawyer named Wayne B. Wheeler. Wayne B. Wheeler was the political genius of his time, and what he did was something that has been imitated by many political operatives since, and that was to organize around a single issue. So in choosing whether to support a candidate, the ASL only had one standard. Is he wet or is he dry? And if you were wet, but also wanted to improve education, bring peace to the world, and provide health care for everybody, they were against you. And if you were dry and you were for the murder of little children, they were virtually for you.
Even brewers conceded that the saloons probably had become a scourge on the American landscape, and yet they themselves were tied to it. Brewers tried to turn the tide by promoting beer as a beverage of moderation, by arguing that the real problem with alcohol was always going to be spirits. So brewers tried to get that message out and failed miserably.
By 1915, the success of the temperance movement had stunned the beer and liquor industries. The dry politicians they once supported had already passed laws prohibiting alcohol in more than half of the country. America's love affair with beer, many feared, was coming to an end.
The force against them was so strong and so much better organized that the brewers never really stood a chance.
The brewing industry was under siege. As state after state went dry, lager sales declined. And now a war on another continent was about to reshape the country's attitude towards beer.
When the United States entered World War I, Prohibitionists recognized this as the opportunity to really finally push for a constitutional ban rather than just state-by-state ban on alcohol. The Anti-Saloon League engineered a series of congressional hearings in which German Americans in general and German American brewers in particular were paraded before the American people as German spies, as traitors.
Temperance advocates accused the beer barons of funding pro-German propaganda that was undermining national security.
The hearings were a farce in every conceivable way. But whatever sympathy the American public had left for the brewers was certainly over and done with by the time these hearings were over with.
Who were the villains but these brewers? They were serving the Kaiser, and I think that that really finally was the thing that put Prohibition over.
The 18th Amendment was ratified by the necessary number of states in early January of 1919 and went into effect in early January of 1920.
When Prohibition went into effect, there were about 185 breweries whose doors were still open. Only a handful of those made it through Prohibition, and they did so with a combination of ingenuity and just simple business smarts.
Whether it was Pabst or Schlitz or Coors, they all found other things to do. Largely, the key one was making soft drinks, either beer-type beverages with the alcohol removed, which was hardly beer at all, near beer, as the term of the time came to be known, or soft drinks.
My grandfather got involved in ice cream. He built a dairy across the street, and he made very good ice cream. And other breweries did the same thing. Basically, I think because a lot of the refrigeration equipment in a dairy is much the same as the refrigeration in a brewery.
But none prospered under this. None of them could possibly prosper. It was nothing like, however good the ice cream was, it wasn't like selling beer.
Although Prohibition clamped down on legal brewing, the government was never able to force drinkers to completely give up their beer.
Most Americans obeyed the law, and those who chose to violate it did so in the privacy of their home by going to a grocery store and buying a kit which very clearly said, do not let this sit and ferment for 6 weeks, because if you do, the alcohol will be the result.
Some of the large breweries were selling very large amounts of hopped malt extract, and that doesn't make good muffins. That's really only used for brewing beer.
The drinking public also turned to a new, illegal source for beer: organized crime.
By 1925, there are full-scale breweries operating all over the country, particularly major cities, illegally, but with the protection of paid-off police and other authorities.
Al Capone famously had a number of different breweries in Chicago. Was one of his big revenue sources was keeping these breweries going.
The manufacture and sale of illegal booze was as well organized and efficient as legal booze had been before Prohibition.
One of the problems that the illegal brewers had is that beer is very, very bulky. You could put 6, 8 cases of hard stuff in the back seat of a car, and you've actually moved a great deal of goods.
Why spend $1 on a bottle of beer when for $5 you can buy a fifth of bootleg gin and have a party? So beer was never the drink of choice during Prohibition to speak of. Spirits were much more popular.
There's no question that organized crime in this country existed before Prohibition, but I think there's also no question that it really learned how to do its business well during Prohibition.
Prohibition was a disaster, and it was fostering a contempt for law and a contempt for the Constitution that many people feared was going to undermine the real fiber of American society. So by the middle 20s, there finally emerged active, organized forces against Prohibition.
We believe that the 18th Amendment has failed, and failed badly. I'm a reformed prohibitionist myself. I hoped it was going to work.
What was the tide that turned America against Prohibition? Well, more than anything else, the Great Depression.
That really speeds up the public opposition to Prohibition for a lot of reasons. We need to bring back the jobs that were lost. We need to bring back the tax revenue that was lost. We also need to make our lives, bring a little sunlight into our lives when things were so bad. The notion that you can legislate people's behavior, I think, has been proven century after century. It just doesn't work.
On May 9th, 1932, New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker led a massive demonstration to send Washington a message.
100,000 New Yorkers can't be wrong.
Prohibition was a big mistake. Within a year, a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, signed a bill that finally lifted the ban on beer.